The sports you love, the teams you can't live without.
Get a sense of urgency!
This is Jake Scott and Ben Anderson on 97.5 The KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5 The KSL Sports Zone. Jake Scott, Ben Anderson. Ben, there's a big game in college basketball tomorrow. I don't know if you heard. The Cougs on the road, taking on the Kansas Jayhawks. And once again, I reiterating, love it that BYU's and Utah, for that matter, are in the Big 12, and we have these big-time college basketball games. Man, is it better than the old Mountain West used to be. And that was a good basketball league.
It was.
Anyway, let's talk about it. He covers the Kansas Jayhawks for the Lawrence Journal-World. He's Henry Greenstein with us here on Jake and Ben. Henry, thanks for a few minutes. How are you?
I'm doing just fine, guys. Thanks for having me. And, man, is there a lot of anticipation for tomorrow's game.
Yeah, I will tell you, I'm honestly not sure the state of Utah has caught up to the frenzy of college basketball and exactly how big these games are. When BYU was in the WCC, occasionally Gonzaga would come to town as a top 5 ranked team, and there was some buzz, but it wasn't year in and year out, so I think it would lose some muster. What does this game mean for Kansas? What does this matchup mean and kind of, you know, within the tradition of playing big games in that city?
Well, there's a team-wide element and there's sort of a nationwide element. So on the one hand, you know, well, first of all, there's a bit of a reversal here because usually it's KU comes into town at some other road arena and that's the biggest ticket in town. This time it's a little bit different. This is one of the most anticipated games at Allen Fieldhouse all year. You know, they had UConn in the non-con, but this may be the single most anticipated conference game on the entire slate, and that's because of the DP versus AJ of it all. You know, opportunities to see the potential top 2 picks in the upcoming NBA draft are so rare. Last time it happened was November 2021 when it was Paolo Banchero and Chet Holmgren in a Duke Gonzaga game. There will be plenty of alumni here. Paul Pierce is supposed to be here. There will be numerous scouts. I think it would be foolish for any NBA scouting department not to have some kind of representative. So all of that provides a lot of handy storylines for people to run with in the lead up to this. But this is also a very important game for Kansas in the scope of its season. You know, they started out 1-2 in the Big 12. And for a lot of people, that sounded plenty of alarms because of how the last 2 seasons have gone. You know, this is a program that at one point won like 14 consecutive Big 12 regular season titles. And the last 2 years in which they got beaten by BYU in both, by the way, were the least successful of Bill Self's tenure. He's now in his 23rd season with the program, and there was some concern that DP and all, this would be similar when they started 1-2, but they've rattled off 4 straight wins, 2 at home against good teams, 2 on the road against not particularly good teams. And this BYU test, which comes after an open date at midweek, obviously the only open date they'll get in the schedule, is kind of a test to see, like, are they really among the best teams in the conference this year? It seems like they could be. Obviously, the injury stuff Peterson has dealt with has kind of prevented them from obtaining their full form, I guess, or we don't really know what they look like when he's in the fold for an extended stretch. But this game is kind of the first real test of, okay, is KU a real contender for the Big 12 and for like a high seed in the Big 12 NCAA tournament this year? Or is it going to be a situation like the last 2 where they're kind of on the periphery and not really at the level that Self and his teams have established in the past?
So tell us a little bit about what to expect from Peterson or DP, as you say, as he's coming back from injury, and what his impact you think will be on the game.
Well, I mean, thankfully for KU, he's had a little bit of time off. You know, well, I guess I'll go back to the beginning. I mean, at the beginning of the year, it was a hamstring injury. Then he was sick. Then he had cramps. And the thing people have probably heard about the most were the cramps because there were so many games where he would get through maybe like 28 to 30 minutes, and then he would suddenly kind of lose his effectiveness and then ask to come out. And then that would often be at really inopportune moments in games. I mean, that's sort of what happened to KU at UCF in one of those early losses that I mentioned. And people were wondering, is this ever going to be a thing where KU gets the full-fledged version of the player Bill Self has called the best he's ever recruited? But then against Colorado, there was good news and bad news. The good news was that Peterson got through a full game. The bad news was that he did it despite the fact that he sprained his ankle midway through the game. So it was kind of a mixed bag because on the one hand, okay, seems like they're moving past the cramps, but on the other hand, he was really a diminished version of himself for the last 5-10 minutes or so because he hurt his ankle kind of defending away from the ball, just a kind of a freak thing where he rolled it. So he missed the game at K-State after that, but now all indications are he'll be good for Saturday. And, the extent to which he's recovered, I don't think it will have much impact on how much he scores, but it will certainly have some impact on the way in which he does it. What I mean by that is rarely this year have we seen the full explosiveness that is supposed to be one of Peterson's defining traits. One of the things that makes him so good is his first step is so strong. It looks like others are playing in slow motion some of the time because of how quickly he can get around a single defender and explode into a layup or a tough drive or whatever. But he's kind of been more of a shooter a lot of the time this year because he hasn't felt quite as confident in his legs because of that variety of issues I mentioned. So exactly how healthy he feels will have a big impact on the play style that KU gets from him. Obviously, like when he's at full strength, he's one of the best players in the country, as we know. He pulls up for shots that no one else can and makes them with an alarming degree of accuracy. I already talked about how good he is as a driver. He's a capable defender. He's got good active hands. He can obviously move laterally with anyone. He's a really, really good all-around player. Still a bit of an enigma at this point because he's only played half of KU's games and has only finished out one or two of them. But absolutely he can score with anybody when he's at his best. We just don't quite know what percentage of Darryn Peterson we will see on Saturday.
The other weird part of this with Darryn, and I wonder if you can clear it up, because I'm certainly not doubting his talent. He is. He's going to be a top 2 pick in the draft, probably, or has a real chance to be the number 1 overall player. 3 of Kansas's 5 losses have come with him on the floor, and in his 10 games, they are 7-3, but 2 of those games also went to overtime. They were almost 500 this year in games that he has played. Is there a disruption in how the team plays when he is out there, or is it the fact that you just never know when he's going to be on the floor or not?
Well, obviously there's a little bit of a selection element to that because he's played in a lot of games against tough teams. But you're right, they've taken time to adapt to having him on the floor. This team built a really successful defensive identity based on switching 5 when he was gone. They got through the whole players era, went 3-0 there with Peterson out. It really seemed like they were rounding into form. Then when he came back, there was sort of this thing where it looked like 2 different versions of the team, one with him on the floor and one without. And that's not necessarily entirely his fault. It's also a matter of the other players learning how to play with him and the fact that they need to defer to him, but also still be aggressive. Here's an example. Against UCF, I believe I've got these numbers right, Peterson scored 23 in the first half, and Melvin Council scored 0. Now, if you've been following KU before that, you would know that just a few games earlier, Council had 36 in a game against NC State. Second half, Peterson barely plays because he's hampered by the cramps. He scores 3 points, and Council scores 20. And this was very much the kind of give and take that we saw between, like I said, 2 different versions of the team where it felt like other players fade to the background too much when Peterson was out there. But in recent games, at least the ones he's been able to play, it's starting to seem like those versions of the team are merging together a little bit more. The ball movement on offense is looking a lot more fluid. There's been much less stagnation. The defense has risen back to the level when it was like the top 3-point field goal percentage defense in the country in non-con, rather than what it showed in the first 2 games of conference play where it gave up 100 to TCU. And they still won that game, but they did not deserve to. But all that is to say, yeah, it's been a process. And it's been a process even it's crazy to say this because of how insanely good Peterson is, particularly the offensive end. But it's been a process for the version of the team with him and the version of the team without him to kind of converge in terms of quality.
I find the blue blood discussion in football and basketball interesting nowadays with the new rules, right? And how finances from both donors and now in the rev share system are really the most relevant thing all of a sudden in schools like, you look at Vanderbilt in football that are, all of a sudden have these financial resources and are coming out of nowhere. And maybe Alabama won't be Alabama going forward with the new rules. I'm curious how Kansas, the basketball program, has adapted to the new rules and the financing, and are they paying like blue bloods pay?
Yeah, I think KU is certainly, if not in the top tier in terms of how much money they have available, they're probably in the second tier in terms of like revenue sharing and NIL. You know, obviously one interesting topic is there are some teams that don't really feel quite as beholden to their football programs or have no football programs at all. And how much does it benefit someone in the Big East, for example, that they don't have to worry about a team that in most schools occupies like 75 to 80% of that $20.5 million revenue sharing cap. But, you know, KU's football team probably gets a little bit less than the average Big 12 football team simply because basketball has a tradition to uphold. And in order to do that, it needs to be able to pay players at the highest level. But KU is well situated. You know, they have a thing called Flight. It's essentially an in-house marketing agency in partnership with kind of a local firm where that is kind of exclusively devoted to arranging those NIL deals that, if approved, can go above the cap. I think that's been a useful asset to them in a variety of sports, just being able to have a purpose-built arm to arrange those deals, and that allows them to go beyond the $20.5 million. The thing that has maybe brought KU down a little bit in recent years is not so much the money, but I guess the margin for error, as Bill Self calls it. The fact that these days, in large part because of the portal, you can't have rosters where you got 7 future pros or whatever, like KU did at times in the late 2000s, early 2010s, where, you know, you've got guys who are going to carve out long NBA careers coming off the bench. That doesn't happen anymore because they don't all choose to go to the same place. And if they do go to a place where they have that high level of talent around them, they may transfer elsewhere because they want to be in the spotlight. And that's just a fact of life, and that's something that KU is growing to adjust to. But I do give the Jayhawks credit for this past offseason that, you know, they were being doubted a lot. They lost basically their entire team from last year in the portal with the exception of Flory Badunga and Marco Jackson and DeMar McDowell, both redshirted last year. So Badunga is the only scholarship player who saw minutes last season. And there was a lot of criticism out there in the world about how they didn't go after, or at least didn't successfully obtain, a lot of the big-name players in the portal that they were initially linked to. But Melvin Council and Trey White have been revelations. Like, probably, I mean, Hunter Dickinson was an All-American, but at least besides him, like, the two best players KU has acquired in the portal era, potentially. And neither one of them was super highly touted. You know, Trey White's a career glue guy who's been at 4 schools in 4 years and is now playing the best he had in his career and shooting 43% from beyond the arc. And Melvin Council picked KU over, like, Georgia, Mississippi State, and Georgia Tech. So it's not like there was blue blood competition for him. And they've been pretty incredible. So KU has stepped up its talent evaluation, I think, this season as well, to account for the fact that it can't stockpile an entire NBA roster on its roster anymore.
6 of the next 10 opponents for Kansas are top 15 ranked. BYU is the lowest ranked at number 13, to give you a sense of how difficult this stretch is going to be. What does this stretch mean for Kansas, and what does this game specifically to tip it off mean for what the future this season looks like?
Well, you know, KU expects to win every game at home because that's how Allen Fieldhouse is. It's a rarity for them to lose multiple home games in a single season. It's only happened a few times under Bill Self. Obviously, they've already lost one. Obviously, they've still got to host Houston and Arizona, so it's not going to be easy. But, I mean, look at what happened to Iowa State a couple weeks ago. They came in unbeaten and lost by a lot. And that kind of was what started KU on its current upward trajectory. But, yeah, this, like I said before, this will be a litmus test of exactly where KU stands. If they lose at home to a team that's about equal with them, both in the AP poll and in KenPom and all that, that could maybe signal that they could be in for a rough ride these next few weeks. I mean, you alluded to it, but even just focusing on the next few games, they got a Saturday, Monday turnaround into playing at Texas Tech, which obviously BYU has seen firsthand how difficult that can be. And last time KU played at Tech, they lost by 29, and Bill Self got ejected. So probably hoping not to repeat that this time around. Then they come back and play Utah, which is the easiest in the 5, but then they have another Saturday, Monday turnaround into home versus Arizona, still unbeaten, clearly. And then they play at Hilton Coliseum against a group of Cyclones who will undoubtedly vent on revenge. So, yeah, it only gets harder from here. And this will help KU get acclimated to the level of talent that it is soon to face to a far greater degree than games against the likes of Colorado and Kansas State did in recent weeks.
Hey, Utah's coming up.
Yeah.
Big one against
exactly.
Utah. Yeah.
Curious what Bill Self is like to cover. I like to ask people who spend time with these, quirky, legendary coaches what it's like to cover them.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of different ways to go with it. I'd describe him as friendly with the media overall. He's always capable of providing relevant perspective on issues of national import in a way that befits his experience, but also befits the fact that he went through a years-long struggle with the NCAA and doesn't necessarily think that people always want to hear his thoughts on NCAA-related issues anymore. So that can be interesting, and he said that himself on numerous occasions. But, it's like he's seen the conference evolve, and he's been remarkably level-headed about it, even as things have gotten challenging for them. He always says, what industry doesn't go through a period of change? I think that the line he kept saying last year was, if you're a trucker, your industry goes through change. If you're a plumber, your industry. So I think he's kind of had this what will come sort of attitude to the vagaries of modern-day college basketball, which, in some sense it befits his folksy personality, but it also doesn't really align with someone who's as fierce a competitor as he is. And obviously in the background, he's doing everything he can to adapt to those sorts of changes. But, yeah, it's been interesting certainly to see him contend with this period of a little bit of a downturn for KU. Of course, what's regarded as a downturn at KU would be success at many other schools. But it's been interesting because my entire time covering the beat coincides with these years where KU hasn't been quite as successful. I came in the spring of 23. So it'll be interesting to see down the stretch this year if they return to the success of earlier years of the Self era, and if so, how exactly covering the team changes. But I would say I've gotten a pretty interesting picture of what it's like to cover a storied program that has had to encounter some new challenges, the likes of which it's never seen before.
Well, listen, I think we're in for a good one tomorrow, Henry. Thank you for jumping on with us. We appreciate your perspective. Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to it as well, and I appreciate you guys having me on.
Thanks, Henry.
Thanks, Henry.